Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event. We will discuss how to create data-driven digital products with the emphasis on data-driven. This event is organized by Tech in Asia, the leading tech and startup publication in the region, as well as Amplitude. Since its inception in 2014, Amplitude has been helping product-led companies who want to understand user behavior, ship faster, and drive strong business outcomes. I'm Daniel, growth lead at Tech in Asia, and today joining me to discuss this topic, which mixes some arts and a lot of science, are Rachel Herrera and Anupama Hoon. Rachel is a professional service team lead at Amplitude. She's been delivering data and analytics solutions to customers for the past 10 years across multiple industries and technology stacks. Joining us today is also Anupama, Chief Product Officer at Zenyum, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. She's an ex-banker who turned to the joy of products. All right, let's hear from our speaker, Rachel. Pam, please join me on stage, all right? And Rachel, you want to start introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here, Daniel, and Tech in Asia. So my name is Rachel Herrera. I'm actually based in the Dallas area here in Texas, so I might drop a few y'alls today. So just be ready for that. And yeah, I have really lived and breathed analytics for the last 10 years. I've worked in several different industries, helping build Tableau solutions, data engineering solutions. Now, excitingly, been at Amplitude for the past 3.5 years on the professional services team, helping all of our wonderful customers get the most out of the tool, helping some change management, how to drive insights and derive information from the data that they're collecting.
Excellent. All right. Looking forward to learn from you today. Pam, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, I'm Anupama, short form Pam. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Zenyum. And just a little bit about Zenyum before I head on to what I was doing before this in my former life. Zenyum is a leading smile cosmetics company in Asia. It was founded in 2018, and we offer an exciting range of dental care products. Zenyum straightens teeth with our invisible braces to start with at a very affordable pricing in Asia. And we never compromise on our quality and are partnered with a large network of partner dentists across 9 markets at the moment. We also cater to the logistics of this very complex region in Asia by connecting our patients via the Zenyum app at regular intervals to check in on the entire treatment. Once your treatment is over, we also help you to keep smiling by offering products like retainers, power toothbrushes, teeth whitening, and dental cosmetic packages. Most importantly, we aim to transform oral care from being a boring chore to an exciting ritual, and have opened up a category that was previously inaccessible to hundreds of millions of customers in Asia. I lead tech and product at Zenyum, and I'm responsible for curating the digital and the consumer experiences for internal and the consumers alike.
All right, great. Thank you very much. All right, let's dive in. Rachel, maybe you want to get us started and explain a little bit this trend of companies moving from intuition-based to data-driven digital product development. You're on mute.
Sorry, you would think after 2 years of this, I would not do that anymore.
I have the same problem.
Yeah. No, wonderful question. I think on the data-driven side with digital products, it's really, I think, born out of necessity. Now that the product is in the digital space, you should be collecting data on how your users are engaging with it. I think that's a unique value add to engaging with your customer in that digital world as opposed to the physical world. And the use of data is something that has been innate in driving business outcomes for a very long time. And now that the product is quickly becoming sort of that revenue center for a lot of these companies, especially with folks being locked in and having to basically only interact with companies, brands, people digitally, it's really kind of forced that curve to accelerate a lot more quickly. I think I read a statistic that the amount of growth in the digital data collection and data analytics and digital product space has grown at the same rate over the last 2 years that it did over the last 10. So it's really a matter of, if you're not doing it, why, and when were you going to start? Because it sounds like it probably should have been yesterday.
Wow, yeah, impressive growth for sure. Pam, do you want to add something?
Sure, I think I can speak from the perspective of startups quite clearly. We're ourselves a very young company. I think we start the product market fit with intuition-based decisions. But as we grow and scale and as we grow into different markets, I think having the right data also helps you focus on where you need to go next or actually finding that PMF. And maybe I can give you a small sprinkler of an example of how we did that at Zenyum very early on in the days. We actually collect photographs from our customers to see if you are eligible for our invisible braces. We would do that through emails. And of course, that was intuitively a medium of communication. We thought that would work. And very earlier on in the days, it did work out. But as we scaled and went into different markets, I think we understood that, for example, email might not work in a market like Vietnam. And we had to pepper it with calls and communication through different modes like chats or like phone calls from the customer success managers. So by the fact of kind of segmenting the customers and analyzing what kind of segments work better for what kind of communication method, we were able to curate a very special onboarding journey, which actually helped the product team come up with something like an onboarding tool, which is a web-based platform, and we collect your photographs through that platform. No more emails, no more chats, and of course, we don't even need the calls anymore. And we've obviously taken it a step further right now by having an AI-based product on that, where we can filter your photographs and tell you if you're eligible or not. So this entire thing obviously took some time, and it's really like it's a natural progression of how a startup really grows. So in my opinion, as you go along the way and as you scale, data just becomes all the more important for you to kind of drive you to your next focus or next target area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for this example. It makes it's very clear. Maybe just if there are still some people out there that we need to convince that intuition is not enough, or that intuition is not the right way to go. What else can we add on this importance of focusing on data rather than intuition? Do you have some other examples you want to share, or some other reason why people should move to data rather than intuition? Rachel?
Yeah, I think intuition is always going to have an element of bias because it's based on the individual who is interpreting or putting their finger to the wind to figure out what direction we should take things. And I think there are real gains in collecting data from all different types of users, because one thing that may work for one segment may not necessarily work for another. And now you have a unique opportunity to create a personalized and more tailored experience based on how those users want to engage with your products. One example I can think of is I work with a automaker company in the US quite frequently, and they have a customer-facing app that ideally wants to create brand loyalty, make driving that vehicle a lot more personal. You know, they don't just drive from point A to point B. Now they have something that they can make their vehicle a bit more closer to them. And they sort of built an experience for everyone. And they didn't really take into account the true value add of that application. And it wasn't until they were collecting data, working with our team, looking at an Amplitude to see, oh, there's very clear delineations of users that have an electric vehicle. And so they probably need a bit of a different experience than users that drive our traditional gas vehicles. And how can we make that a lot more clear cut?
Yeah. And electric vehicles are the future anyway. So, all right. I see a question that came in from Stephen. Thank you very much, Stephen. I think I'll integrate your question a little bit later in the discussion. So, by the way, everyone who is watching, please do send us your question. We'll be happy to answer all of them. All right. So, as we move on, so I think we've convinced everyone. Hopefully, we've convinced everyone by this point that data-driven is the way to go. So what sort of metrics should people be looking at? Maybe Pam, you want to share like what are some of the metrics that you're looking at, and how, on what do you base this data-driven approach?
Sure, happy to take that. So I think there is one sort of kind of benchmark metrics that everyone obviously looks at. What are your engagement metrics? What is your feature adoption metrics and all of that, right? Always good to kind of start that and get an idea from different other companies and also from reading up. But I think what's very important for most companies is to figure out what is that one thing that obviously hurts you the most in the business, right? And having that mix of what is benchmark and also something that kind of critically moves the needle for you and keeping that alive is what matters the most. So, for example, I can talk about something like NPS, right? So that this is something that most of the companies obviously follow. But is that something that is going to be critical to your decision making in terms of where you are going to go? Maybe, maybe not. But what else could it be around that? So apart from the benchmark metric, what else could you look around that which will really move the needle for you? So in my example, in a case, I want to know if my customers are happy. And how do I measure whether they are happy? I could be measuring them through CSAT. I could be measuring whether they've recommended us, going back to NPS. I could be measuring how did they buy another product from our site? Did they refer somebody else? But maybe identifying that micro segment of customers and the action that you want them to do would be a great place for us to start off when we think of defining metrics as well. And yeah, I think that's the right thing to say right now.
Yeah. So the thing that hurts you the most, the action that you want people to take. Okay. Very interesting. Rachel, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I definitely love the point about finding the thing that hurts you most. I think sometimes companies love to over-index on where they are succeeding, and it sometimes is more interesting to look at where you're failing and where customers are falling out of really key funnels. And I would say, as far as metrics go, I mean, a metric is really just a collection of all the different data elements and points that a company is collecting on their various users. So it really comes down to, what do they want to do over a certain period of time, or what sort of ratio of customers are doing something as opposed to a segment of customers overall. I think it's really about finding, what are you trying to move the needle on and impact, and then building your metrics towards that, kind of using that North Star framework a little bit. And then when you've got your metric, really making sure you've got benchmarks and you're setting goals for yourself, so that it's not just a kind of frivolous celebration of, yay, we hit this high number, but is that actually the number that's going to get you to the ultimate goals that the teams are driving towards?
Yeah, there's really an importance of finding the right metrics, right? And not some metrics that will be ego driven, maybe, or a lot of time, like those metrics that will come with intuition. It's finding the right metrics.
And when a company, when I come in sometimes, and usually the first step of how we implement or deploy Amplitude is, we understand what are the use cases, and use cases can quickly translate to the metrics that they would want to essentially drive with the data that they would ideally be collecting. And I can't tell you how many times the first thing that comes out of a customer's mouth is weekly active users. And I sort of have to talk them off that ledge a little bit and say, that's important. However, are they doing value add activities within your app? And then we get into a lot more meaty conversation of percentage of weekly active users who do X within their first Y number of days. And then it becomes the more magic metric that helps them see, are they really getting these customers sticky versus just simply a leaky bucket of, we've got a bunch of weekly active users and that's good, and we're just going to step away from it. Like Pam said, find the thing that you're not doing great at.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So how do company go about obtaining this key data points? How do you find the right metrics, and then how do you go about measuring it? Let's dive a little bit deeper on this. Pam, you want to take this?
Sure. I think one thing, this topic is quite close to my heart, because I always like to kind of explain one thing that's all that I look at all the time, which is the customer journey map, right? This is something that you start creating. So that's actually the base point. It's the baseline. Let's understand what the customer is doing at what part of the funnel, what is the action that they're taking, and what do you expect them to do. So I think also wanted to share, very early on in Zenyum days, when I'd come in, I was the first product person at Zenyum as well. We kind of built that out, obviously, on whiteboards and post-its, and it was like super startup-y looking. And we then kind of progressed to making it like a super full-fledged flow, which we kind of look back every day. So you also create micro customer journeys or micro funnel in this entire play, and go back and look at how that's performing. And then you add on the expected action or where you need it to be, and see where you're at. I think that's always a great place to start with. For me, that always remains a mantra to go back to every single day of my life, right? And I also kind of try to get that instilled in the product managers in their team, of how, when they're responsible for their features, to just keep on going back to that, and then deriving what do you expect it to happen. So let me give you an example. If I look at the patients who are in treatment right now, who've already bought our product, they're with us for 1 year. Do I now look at weekly active users or just or MAU and feel happy that yes, we've got, or whoever is expected to come is coming. In our journey, for example, they have to come, they have to download the app. So for me, a 90% or 100% MAU means good to show, but does that really mean anything to me? Am I really growing? What would probably make a difference to me is how often they're engaging with us. Do they come every day and use the features that we've made on the app? Do they report on their progress, for example? And then taking it, so if I'm able to find that, I can then take an action beyond that. I spoke about having different other product lines that we're also selling. Can I then monetize that with the other product lines that I have? But even when I go further to that, I still need to come back to know whether the action that I expected them to do on a particular feature or on a daily basis has in fact been completed or not. And very important to keep these metrics, which is very critical to or inherent to your business, very true to yourself. And one thing that data analysis actually helps you, or dashboard really help you to do, is also to keep you humble. You can go really all overboard and saying, as I said, 90% MAU, 100% MAU, and could feel quite happy and celebrate that for yourself. But when you look inside and you see that the action you wanted someone to do, whether that occurred or not, and you see where you've landed, it makes you think, and it honestly keeps you alive. It keeps the spirit of experimentation alive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Rachel, do you have examples maybe of tools or ways to organize teams in order to collect these data points? Should it be one person, one team? Should they use a specific tool? Yeah, what would you recommend?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and it depends on, of course, how large the company is and how far stretching the data that you're collecting ends up looking like. I think if you're a multi-product company, it probably makes sense to have sort of some kind of, we usually call it a data governance council or a center of excellence, something to the degree of there needs to be a central owner of data in, data out, just at a very basic level. That's probably agnostic of whatever analytics solution you're using. There's just an element of data cleanliness that needs to persist, because none of the things that Pam and I are talking about can happen unless your data is clean, trustworthy, is accurate, is maintained, and is representative of the product itself. And so I think that is definitely not worth, is worth pausing and just kind of making note of. But then when it gets to the actual work of what are we tracking, how are we tracking it, there's this sort of step zero that happens when you stand up a tool like Amplitude or really any other first-party data collection tool. You've got to set your standards and figure out, what is your company's data language going to be? And I call it a language because it really ends up being something that everybody is going to have to learn and be able to speak in meetings, in stand-ups, in communication, and email. And so it needs to be something that everybody can just kind of glob onto and figure out, okay, this is what that metric means. These are the events that represent it. This is how we represent those events. It's a verb noun combination, uppercase. I know it sounds very tedious, but it really does pay off, because humans are pretty good at picking up on patterns. So as long as you can keep that pattern consistent and keep it maintained, learning that language becomes a lot easier as your company grows 2-3x. Amplitude, when I joined, it was 150 people. Now we're almost 600. And teaching that many people how to use data all at the same time can be hard if that data is really messy. And so once you've got those standards established, then you get to trickle that down into the product teams. And so as they're in those meetings saying, I'm building this new feature, here's my hypothesis as to why that feature is going to drive outcomes. Here are the outcomes I expect it to drive. And then there's always this nice little layer of, these are the events I need to track in order to measure those outcomes. And then that doesn't become this big effort. It just says a bit of like find and replace, feature name plus action _ page or something like that. And then all of the relevant properties or attributes that need to be attached to it. And so it gets this monotonous thing and turns it into just everyday life. And then once it's habit, it just kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy of, I need data, it's there, it's measuring what I want, I've already got it tied to these outcomes. And so it's really a multi-layered approach of the business at the top needs to agree that data cleanliness is a priority. There needs to be a standard set that all teams are following. Who owns that standard is typically a data engineer or product leader. And then the product managers need to be engaged and enabled on how to use that framework to tag and measure their product decisions.
Yeah, okay. I mean, a lot to unpack in there, and I really, really like. I think that's something that definitely resonates with us at Tech in Asia, that the whole team should have this shared language around data, and everyone should understand what are some of the key metrics that we want to move, and so how everything that we are doing in the company aligns with moving some of those metrics. Okay, before we dive in a little bit deeper on this point, so we have a question from Abhijit, who is asking, in a B2B2C product line, what kind of data should we capture? Is there a general set of data that you think would be relevant for a B2B2C product line? We don't have much to work with here, so yeah. Based on that, I don't know, Rachel, you've probably seen a lot of different clients and cases. What would you recommend?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want this to sound like an Amplitude infomercial, but we do have a feature called accounts that lets you kind of pivot data on a different, I guess, axis, if you want to call it. And so what we typically do with our B2B2C customers is we say, gather all your customer data. So all of the finite user activity that's happening. And then on our account feature, they're able to instrument the second B element. So if I'm Square or Squarespace, for example, my customer is a small business that creates their website that users then engage with to purchase their products. Amplitude's collecting all that data on those customers purchasing the product. And then we've got that data to be able to be pivoted by that small business. So if I'm Squarespace, I can say, how are my small businesses performing? What level of engagement are they getting? And then I can look at what are the end users performing and what level of engagement are they getting? And basically, are we building efficient website templates that drive outcomes for our customers? So it's definitely a bit of a tricky one, but one we've seen quite a bit.
Okay.
I think I can also take that. I can take that a little bit. I think the two sets of things when you're saying what kind of data you can get, right? Like, you can look at what is that data going to help you do? Is it going to help you segment customers because you want to reach out to them at a later time, or you want them to do a particular, you want them to speak to them in a particular manner, or do you want people to be driven down the funnel for a certain action? So depending on what again, it comes back to the metrics, but it depends on what action you want or what outcome that you require. Accordingly, that data is to be collected. And just to say, there's data everywhere. The problem is in organizing it. So the organizing the data really comes back to what's in your mind, the expected action that you would like to happen. Would you like to communicate with them in the future? Then you might need more demographic data. Would you like to drive them down the funnel? Then you might need platform data to know where they are more keen, keen to engage with you. So I guess it's kind of different.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. All right, so coming back to this discussion around data-driven product development. So I'm convinced I need data. I'm going to find the right data to collect to start with, because if I collect the wrong data, then I'm not going to have the right insights from it. So yeah, let's get to that point. So I'm collecting my data. I'm now studying this data, and how can companies turn this data into learning and insights that they can use in their product development? What's the process there? We've touched upon this a little bit, but let's hammer this again. Rachel, you want to go first?
Yeah, I love this question because I think it really puts the rubber to the road of, okay, now what are you going to do? Because you've made all these decisions up top and you're collecting, and it's cool and exciting. Now you have to take action. And a lot of the time, what we try to do, and what I would encourage customers and individuals out on the call thinking about, I've got all this cool data, what do I do with it, is tie it to a product initiative or a product change or some sort of product something. Because if it's not tied to a value add to your customer base or an initiative for the company, it's cool, but is that really the right thing you want to be focusing your energy on? Because we have so much going on in our day-to-day lives nowadays. It's really crucial that anytime you really dive in and dig into figuring out what should I build next, it's tied to something that you're trying to make a decision on right now. And so I would kind of start there, and then pull in all that data of understanding what's the current state of this thing. So how many users are doing it, at what frequency, What are the segments of users doing it? Do any of those things vary by segment? And sort of get in a kind of a lay of the land, if you will, of that customer journey vision, but by some segmentation or some time elements. And then you can start to sort of see patterns, and you will almost always see things emerge, either a customer base or a segment doing it very poorly, or one doing it way less often than everybody else. And now you've sort of got your first aha. And it's really a matter of layers and steps below that. So it's never the first question you want to have answered. It's always the sixth or seventh that's going to get you to that thing that's going to make you make that next decision. And so I think that's the really cool thing about Amplitude and a lot of these other self-serve analytics tools is, in an old world, you would have to say, hey, analyst, can you pull me some of that data? They would give you that data and you say, oh, interesting. Can you pull me a little bit more about that data? And you're talking a matter of weeks to sort of get to that last bit. But in the self-service world, if you've done everything right, if you've collected things, if you've got your standards set, then you have empowered that individual to go on that journey on their own, create that data story, and say, here's where I started, here's what I found, here's why I think that's an interesting thing. I dove a little bit deeper and saw that they're also failing on this funnel. And then I see that this customer base is actually representative of 10% of our revenue. So imagine if we can increase that conversion by 5%, that equates to an X% lift in revenue. Based on all these things, here's the initiative that I'd like to lead to increase revenue, which is always going to be something that's value add to the company, and then value add to the customer. So that's usually the journey that I try to take my customers on when we talk about these kinds of things.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I from the data that I have, I can make an hypothesis as to why do I see this sort of behavior? Why does a specific metric move the needle in a certain way? Then based on this, I will test my hypothesis with maybe a change in the website design or a new flow or something like this, and then collect results on that experiment to then see whether my hypothesis is confirmed or not, right? So again, all of this based on data. Pam, do you have an example of maybe how you've used some of that data, turn it into meaningful insights and applied it at Zenyum?
Many actually, but I will try to restrict it to a few. And maybe I start with what we did internally. So there are two kind of frameworks that you look at. So how is studying data helping you internally? In my opinion, it firstly helps you prioritize a lot. It helps you prioritize your work. It helps you get more focused. In most of this, again, in the whole startup world that we are in, a lot of companies fail by not being focused and not being execution driven. We speak a lot about being operators and being executors, but it's very hard to even measure the execution if you don't have data to back you up. So one thing that it does do, and especially in a place like Zenyum, where we are in 9 markets, we have to constantly prioritize between different countries, different experiences, different parts of the funnel, etc. So gathering the insights will tell you which part is the red light. Where do you need to focus first, and where should you put most of your kind of resources on, or resources from different organizations as well. Second thing, which I just incidentally thought of, was that by having the right data set, you will also be able to organize your teams much better. Again, if I talk about focus and I talk about execution, it kind of gives you some sort of an insight again. What kind of teams do you need to bring together to kind of move the needle, to move the conversion funnel, as Rachel was mentioning? A 5% or a 2% conversion top of the funnel will have a huge impact on revenue numbers. So it also helps you do that. And the third and the most important part is, of course, the business decisions. So to give you an example, we launched our consumer product business last year, where we started off with selling our electronic toothbrushes in Singapore and Hong Kong. We created a new website for it, and we were looking at what should be the ideal purchase journey. Hasn't really happened at all in Asia. And we were selling toothbrushes separately and brush heads separately. We then kind of analyzed what is the behavior pattern of people who are repeat buyers, who are coming back to buy brush heads. So we understood that actually a lot of them like the annual packages. So people like to kind of just buy 6 brush heads or 3 brush heads at a time. And we started creating that bundle of brush heads along with the brushes as well. So that was a pure business decision that we kind of learned on. We had to, of course, change the website design, the payment structure, and all of that in the back of it. But at the same time, we also learned maybe there was a subscription model that we could have worked out, which also hasn't really, especially in the oral care category, that isn't something that we have kind of looked at intensely here. So it kind of helped us make the business decision of how do you sell your product, depending on the behavior of users on your different platforms. So I guess this is where it was. Maybe another point that also helped was on the dentistry side of it, where we have a communication platform with the dentist. And we created that about 2 years ago, which was a desktop version. But then we saw that there were a lot of complaints on slowness, speed, and uploading photographs. And we realized that it was actually the nurses who were using that and not the doctors. So we now are kind of releasing our new proprietary custom software for the dentist, where we've created it a mobile version and a tab version and a desktop version, and for the different audiences that are going to use that. And that is how, that is something that has helped us create the right kind of experiences for our partners.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Yeah, like those insights that you uncover from data, from studying the use of the product. Absolutely. And that would not come with intuition, right? So that's where you need all this. Okay, we have a question from Santa Mara, who's asking kind of a definition question, I guess. Is data science, AI, machine learning, deep learning all the same when it comes to manipulating data to bring relevant insights, be it patterns or groups or predictions? How exactly do they differ, or are they similar when it comes to data? So yeah. One of you wants to take this?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I think it's there's lots of data-y type terms that get thrown around. And I think the best way to think of an AI machine learning type capability or tool that you end up investing in, or a team that you build, is you've got all this data and you've got a very clear hypothesis with a very clear outcome. What sort of signals and monitors and alerts within that data set can you programmatically pull out, so you're not having to do quite as much of the mining for insights that teams tend to do sometimes, especially if they're in early stages, or especially if they're about to break into brand new ventures and they're just really not quite sure what that next step or what that next thing or what that next group might look like. So I don't think it's a silver bullet to solve any and all analytics challenges. And it's certainly something that if your data, and you guys will tire of me saying this, if your data is not clean, it doesn't matter, because those models will pick up the wrong signals because there's not enough trust or durability of that data set for it to be really, really consistent. Because ideally that model should get better over time as you make those changes and as you influence those decisions that the model comes out with. One example is, again, don't want to sound like an infomercial, but I will. Amplitude has this recommend product. So it's basically a way that we can collect, we're already collecting all this behavioral data off of our customers. And the customer says, like a streaming media customer that I work with, they're using it to recommend the next movie that a user should watch. And that model's inputs are all of the other films and television shows that those users have watched, and to what degree of success have they completed them. And so it's looking at signals to say, oh, well, if they're doing these other actions, then they're way more likely to be successful if you present them with these specific titles. And that is a really great way to kind of circumvent the heuristic recommendation of, if I watch The Dark Knight, I'll probably want to watch The Dark Knight Rises, and get a little bit more smart about saying, if I watch The Dark Knight, maybe I might be interested in another DC type movie. But based on the other actions I've done, is it going to be this one or that one? And so, yeah, hopefully that's helpful. But that's been my experience with how we kind of differentiate the idea of traditional analytics and how AI, deep learning, machine learning can be used to solve some of those harder problems.
I think it's helpful. I just see he replied and said amazing in the comments. So I think you nailed it. Well done. Another question that we have from Abhijit here is, should I focus on the most active users and their data, Or should I focus on the not so active users? So how do I select and we talked a little bit about prioritization earlier. Yeah, who should I focus on if I see I have all this data? How do I go about prioritization? Pam, you want to take this one?
Sure. I think the answer would be somewhere in between. You start with your most active users and their data and understand the pattern, what they are following, and understand the actions they are taking or the outcome that they are driving. And then you go back into your not so active users and understand what do you need to do to get them to that level. So I think the focus should always be on what you already have and learn from it, derive patterns from it, make hypotheses out of those, and then try to experiment with the set of not so active users to get them to that level. And of course, if that could happen, which is very rare, that you've got everybody active, which doesn't really happen, then well, you're a winner. But if you're not, you need to continuously do this. They would be, suppose you've got 40% active users, you try to get it to 50, you try to get it to 60 slowly, but first identify what is it that is making you successful in your most active users, and then try to derive hypotheses into getting everybody else doing the same action.
Right. Okay. Rachel, you want to add something to this?
Well, I completely agree. That's what we try to teach our customers as well, is learn from the winners and then try to replicate that into your product journey, and then ideally grow that active user base over time. I would also say it's really hard to collect the inactive user information because they're not doing anything. So you kind of have this data gap and this data void for those individuals. So I think it becomes even more important to really get a good sense of what are those really successful users doing, and then maybe even piecemealing them out a bit more of the power users, the top 1% of your user base, what's sort of that middle, and then what are sort of the early adopters looking like, so that you can get a sense of what that journey looks like. So you're not expecting everybody to be the 1%, because that, as Pam said, will likely never happen. But how can you get as many people as possible into those maybe early adopter or middle adopter buckets, so that maybe over a longer period of time, they could eventually become those 1% power users.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think something we touched upon earlier as well is around what is going to be when I'm going to be comparing all the different hypotheses that I have and experiments that I want to run, because I can't do everything at the same time, right? So one good way to go about this is, what is the impact that I expect from each of those experiments on my revenue or on other key metrics that I want to move, right? So maybe by comparing those two, I'll see in my specific case, okay, I should focus on the not so active users because that's where there is more of an opportunity. So yeah, probably another way to approach this question. Okay, we have another question from Nivedan, who is asking, so I work at an e-commerce startup, B2B product for digitizing small businesses. So my question is, how can we have a reusable template? Say we resurrect a different touchpoint funnel for checkout as an experiment. How do I take a call on what experiment to prioritize? Also, I'm an entry-level analyst. How do I get better at what experiments to design in the first place? So again, this question around like prioritization and how to design experiments to validate some of the hypotheses. Any of you wants to jump in on this one?
I can. Yeah, I think it goes back to that one line, go back to your customer journey map, see what's hurting you the most, which part of the funnel is going to affect you the most, and prioritize that first. Because you can, of course, get quite bogged down or tied down into vanity metrics, like maybe I just need to touch that bit and it's going to move the needle. But it's more important to first understand what is going to move your needle. And once you get that answer, the prioritization is very obvious to you. And you don't need to, and I know, by the way, everything looks exciting. Everything looks cool. Oh my God, middle of the funnel is this, bottom of the funnel, payment methods, all of that looks great. But just to kind of going back to your customer journey map, always have that open on the side tab, by the way, and going and seeing what affects you the most is exactly where you need to focus on. Having said that, I also strongly believe in having having the spirit of experimentation always live and always open for you. And there's no harm in even trying 2 or 3 smaller things together in different segments, but do not try 2 things together in one segment. That's just big rule.
Okay, yeah, that's makes a lot of sense. And so maybe just a follow-up question on this. I see Eva ask a question about segmentation. How do you go about segmenting highly engaged and active users? Is it users who are alive on D7, for example, or is there another criteria that I should use to define what is what are active and engaged users? Rachel, you want to take this one?
Yeah, happy to. I think there's an engagement framework that I like to teach customers when they have, similar challenges of what is an engaged user? What does that mean? And it comes down to, we call it a critical event, but it really is, what's the thing that the user does on your product where you know they're gaining value from it? So it can't be a login event because everybody does that. And it can't be some hidden deep within the experience event that maybe not many people get exposed to. But if you think of like a music streaming app or a media streaming app, it's, playing a piece of content would be sort of their critical event. Or if it's a workflow app, it's completing a first task or creating a task. And so if you think in those terms and you sort of narrow down what does that critical event mean to that particular product, or if you're on a team, what does that mean in your particular suite of features or that kind of section of the product, then you can actually use a reverse retention chart to see how many days before the user actually does that twice. And so if it's something that they do twice every day, then you have a D1 metric is your engaged user group. If they do it twice over a period of 7 days, so they do it on day 1 and then they don't do it again until day 7, then D7 becomes your metric there. Some products are even day 14. If you think of like a payday app like Workday, I'm not logging into Workday every day. I'm logging it the 15th and 30th when I get my paycheck. And so it's really about measuring the intent of the user and not sort of forcing something that isn't really applicable or relevant to why does that product exist and for what customer base. Because again, using the Workday example, they're not an Amplitude customer. We're just migrating to Workday. So that's why it's top of mind for me. Mm-hmm. If you're an admin, you're going to be in daily. But if you are an employee, you're going to likely be in much less frequently. So back to, we talk a lot about segmentation up to this point, really important when you are measuring the success or the efficacy of, is this feature actually driving value for our customers?
Yeah, and there might be different set of users, different segments who all have their different journey, right? As Pam was mentioning earlier. So that's an important point. Maybe just another question for you. We have a question from Mariana who was asking about what are the indicators that your data is not clean? You've talked about this earlier. How do you know that your data is clean?
If you ask 5 people at your company what that data point means and you get 5 different answers, probably might have a problem there. If somebody new joins your team and says, where's your data dictionary? And you say, what's that? Or I don't know, we haven't touched it in 3 years, probably worth taking a look at. And I think if it's hard to pinpoint the owner of data or of a specific stream of data within your business, then again, it's probably worth looking at and making sure that there's eyes on it and there's ownership behind it. Otherwise, it becomes this ungainly Wild West scenario where you want to grow, you want to do all these really cool things we're talking about, but you have to go to 10 different people in order to stitch together the events that you need to make your impact, or you just go and instrument your own events, and now you're sort of adding to the mess, which is also not ideal, but totally understandable, because at the end of the day, it's like, I just want to get my answers. I want to be a value add to the company. And so I would really kind of put that ownership on leadership at all levels of saying data matters, and here's how it matters to us.
Yeah, thank you. And I think a question which is related to this and that Pam can help us answer. So Chahat is asking, how do you go about creating this data-driven culture in a legacy org, maybe, that is undergoing a digital transformation? Their products are very nascent and more focused on developing and shipping. But so, how do you go about changing the culture and going through this transformation?
I love this question, and I think it is super relevant, right, to all of us. I like the last line. We're more focused on developing and shipping. That's correct, but everybody's still very focused on what is the bottom line. Where are you going to get your numbers from? So you already have that baseline. If you're focused on developing and shipping, means you're interested in growing the business. So that is the first thing we must always remember. And the second part would be, you as a product manager, or you as anybody who is dealing with data in the company, needs to be a little bit drawn towards even creating that one small experiment and showing the impact. So whether you're able to show a conversion of 1 or 2% on any one small area that you've made a difference, you will get everyone's ears perked up, because you need to convince people by doing X, you're going to go Y in your revenue numbers, right? So if you're able to show just that small part, you've already got people hooked on to what you're saying. But by telling people that, hey, I think we should try this and this is going to work out, the minute you have, I think we should try this, not backed by some sort of experiment report, I would say, you're not going to be able to drive change. So, and the third part, what is most important, is having the communication and feedback loop. People are, by nature, nobody really likes change. And nobody wants to be proven that they are really right. And data is the one thing which kind of equalizes everything. There is no ego, there are no personality clashes, there are no department clashes with this. It's very simple. It kind of equalizes the entire organization. So having that feedback and communication loop tied to the one thing that is going to sustain the entire organization would be something that you also follow up on. And just by doing all of these three things, small experiments by yourself together and proving what difference it makes, you will be able to drive that transformation. There would be 2 people who are looking at your report today. There could be 10 people day after tomorrow. There could be 50 people after that. But you've already driven that change by driving it yourself.
Thank you. Rachel, anything you want to add about culture? How do you change the culture?
No, I completely agree. And I think it's either a top down or usually a bottom up. And I think in the startup culture, a lot of the times it feels very bottom up, because there's just so much going on. There's so many decisions that have to be made, that I think everybody who's on the front line of building that great next thing and working with those customers has to be aligned in the idea that we're not just going to make decisions, we're going to make educated, informed decisions together, because we don't have time to redo it. I mean, I think in a lot of those high velocity, high growth startup scenarios, you've got 1, maybe 2 shots to get it done right and be really successful at it. And then you move on to the next thing. So it's not an annual goal, it's a quarterly goal, or it's a sprint goal that you have to move towards. And data is just going to make you that much more confident in the decisions you're going to make. And if everybody can get behind that, then again, you are all speaking that same language. And it's really just like a great motivator. An equalizer. Yep. I love how you put that, Pam.
Yeah, it keeps our ego in check. If everything that we do is based on data, then, well, you might be the CEO, you might be an intern. At the end of the day, data will speak the truth, right? So that's the important part. Interesting. Okay. Another question that comes from Wimba. What length of data should I capture to be confident in the result? Is it 3, 6, 12 a month? So I guess it depends on the sort of data that we're looking at. We need a certain sample size. Maybe do you have a way of approaching this question on, like, what is a big enough sample size of data so that I can draw some conclusion? Or how do I go about maybe giving some weight to some of that data? Rachel?
Yeah, it really depends on what stage of growth you're in. I think if you're in a new stage, if you're deploying and launching features very quickly, you want that immediate feedback loop really tight, then you probably don't need much data to just quickly validate that this thing works. Because if you're newer, you likely don't have that large of a sample size to test on anyway. And so you really have to trust that this group is going to give you that real honest feedback. And what sort of value add are you going to put on top of them delivering that feedback to you, rather it's an NPS score or just simply using the data or this new feature. Excuse me, I said data, I meant product. But then when you're a bit more established and you've got that historical longevity of the product existing for quite a long time, then it becomes at what rate do you make those product changes? And then how long back do you need to look in order to be confident in those changes? And I think it really comes to the industry, honestly. If you're in tech, you probably don't need to look back further than 6 months because stuff changes in tech so much. Looking year over year in tech is kind of silly sometimes, especially in the times of COVID. I had customers who were like, we want to backfill data from 2020. And I'm like, I don't think 2020 will ever happen again. I don't know how value add that is. And I want to save you a bit of money and make sure that the data is actually valuable and meaningful to you. But if you are in the banking industry or a much more established industry, year over year absolutely makes sense because you need to see that because that's how those businesses are measured. So I would tie whatever decision you make ultimately to how does your business get measured at the end of the day, making sure that you're following suit there. Because when you get in those rooms and you say, this is the decision I'm going to make, and here's the data I used to make it, you need to be able to have that resonate with those leaders who think in those terms of, I'm in a 6-month, I'm in a 12-month kind of cycle where I have to be that confident in the data and that percentage lift that I'm expecting.
Yeah, thank you. I think this also answers Amanda's question. So thank you for that question as well. We have a question from an anonymous attendee who wants to play the devil's advocate. Okay, so I'm going to read. Let's be honest. The amount of digital products have been growing compoundedly, and being data-driven can be a challenge when humans are not perfect in interacting with systems. How does human centricity play a role in data-driven product development? Would you agree that products should be a balance between human-centric and data-centric? Any of you wants to take this one?
I can. I guess it comes back to maybe the second question that you asked on intuition-based and data-driven. I think you're absolutely right. It has to be a mix of both. I think you can't underestimate the power of intuition, and you cannot underestimate how data will kind of help you drive towards maybe your intuition or maybe restrict the confirmation bias that you have. But I think he also mentioned something about being a human centricity in interacting with systems. And maybe I'm not too sure if I understood the question correctly, but it's possible that you mean of how somebody actually derives information from that set of data, because it could be subjective based on different people. If that is so, then I think products like Amplitude are super helpful for us, because it at least gives you some sort of a framework to work on, which is very easy for people to engage with and understand and derive insights on. But maybe if it was only on product development, especially for a business like ours, where we're a mix, we're a hybrid of offline and online. We send you to the dentist, and we're also making an online sale journey for you, for example. It's very important for us to have the information from both sides of the coin to actually take those decisions. Sometimes they're not right, and sometimes they could be quite hard to collect, actually. So like, for example, we spend sometimes hours with the dentist to actually monitor how they are using our system or how they are actually interacting with their patients. That is not something that I can get the data from directly, right? So there's no two ways about it, but especially in hybrid models, I would agree that it's absolutely a beautiful mix of the two.
All right, thank you. Okay, I think we're coming to the end of this session. So before leaving, maybe one question that I have for both of you. After listening to this webinar, what immediate next steps should company take in order to create a great data-driven digital product? Do you have some parting advice for everyone, Rachel?
Apart from buying Amplitude, just kidding. I think what I would say is do the prioritization exercises that Pam and I have talked about and really narrow down on what is the most important thing to start with in this journey. And it doesn't need to be necessarily the most important in terms of it's going to drive the most revenue. It's really about what is top of mind for the business in order to move forward a particular metric or customer engagement or segment, something that you can tether to so that work is value add, not just in learning a new skill and new motion, but also moving the business forward. I don't think that testing or trialing this in a low stakes environment is very successful, because it's really easy to sort of relax and not follow the protocols as you need and not be quite as stringent as you probably need to be. I think it's pretty much showtime. It's really try and embed some of these tactics of finding that critical metric or figuring out what events you need in order to measure the success of the thing you're about to launch, or figuring out how long of that data you actually need to collect in order to show that the thing is impactful. And just do it. I mean, you're already doing without data. Imagine how much more effective you're going to be with data.
Thank you. Pam?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what Rachel said. I love just do it, by the way. It's actually exactly what I feel. Just go ahead and start. And maybe the place for all young companies, especially to start with, is my favorite. Go back to the customer journey map, draw that out. Don't be afraid of it. Keep looking at it every day. And also think of how you can organize your data. There's so much information overload. So I know it gets super hard to prioritize. Think of ways to organize it. Buy the right tools which help you organize it. Buy the right tools which help you clean your data. And maybe the third and the most important point is get the discipline to look at the data every single day. And it really depends from where you are in the organization as well. They could be your own personal dashboard. Again, comes back to what hurts you the most. For the product managers, it could be their feature dashboards, but just make sure you're looking at that data and have the discipline around it. And maybe for the leaders in the group as well, make sure that you can get everyone to understand that it's quite a friendly environment out there. Again, tools like Amplitude make it very colorful, very attractive, quite easy on the eyes. So start using these kind of tools and have the discipline to look at your data every day. So customer journey map, organize your data, and just have the discipline. And finally, I will repeat Rachel because that was so amazing. Just do it.
Amazing. One very last quick question. Is there any resources, maybe a blog, a podcast, or a book that people should look at if they want to learn more about what we've been discussing today? Your top resource, Rachel?
Mine might be a bit skewed because it's in professional services, but there are a few kind of trade journals that I like to listen to. But honestly, I think John Cutler does a really great podcast on this. I'll have to remember. I think it's, I can't remember the name of it, but it's something to do with product. So if I think of it, I will let you guys know so you can post it here. But I like to listen to that. And joining these kinds of webinars, I think, are just great ways of learning from others who have gone through it, been through it, seen it, and then seeing the questions in the chat. I think in some form or function when I join these makes me feel less alone. Like, oh, I'm not the only one. I have the same challenges as everybody else out there. And so really creating some of that community, because it is so, there are top level obvious things that everybody needs to do. But when you get really in it and in the weeds, it's so specific to what you're trying to build, what teams you're using or working with, what tools you're using, how you're doing it. And so it's about learning how others do it and then form fitting it into the way that your company does the business.
Thanks. Chahad's mentioning the name of the podcast is Project to Product, podcast from John Cutler. Thank you. Pam?
Thank you.
I generally like to hear there's something called the product experiences that has loads of stuff on it. I think they did about 150 episodes recently as well. Really fun to kind of hear that. I just also very simply Google stuff which I kind of come across. And also when initially when we signed up for Amplitude, they had a very simple thing. Was it Data for Dummies? The yellow one, I forgot what it was called. Yeah, that is super easy. I kind of got the entire team to read it and all that. So good place to start, I would say. And yeah, just Google and read.
Amazing.
The product experiences I like.
All right, amazing. Thank you very much, Pam. Thank you very much, Rachel. And thank you everyone for joining us today. This event was organized in collaboration between Tech in Asia and Amplitude. Find out more about product analytics and how it can help your business by watching a demo on Amplitude's website of their products. And stay up to date with the trends and news of the local startup scene by visiting techinasia.com.